There is always a risk of speaking out. I think the role of a journalist is a difficult one. It's a battlefield here. We have to stay at the edge. But if you stay too near the heat, you get burnt. If you take a step too far back, you become ineffective. So you have to be constantly getting singed but not burnt. And that's a difficult walk to walk. Bangladesh is my home. This is where I was born. I'm very much a citizen of the land. This is where I belong. Bangladesh was born through a very bloody war of liberation. There was genocide in this country. A lot of sacrifice has been made by very many people to get this nation of ours. What the fight was about was that the average Bangladeshi will have a better life. Sadly, the inequalities remain globally. They also remain within my own country. I believe the task of every conscious citizen to be fighting that at all levels. I do it with my craft, I do it with my students, and I do it with my activism. We live in a very image-saturated world. They're very powerful, they're very convincing. And of course, with photography, there is this perceived veracity, which, while powerful, can also be damaging. I have nothing against Western photographers working in my country. I think my own inadequacies need to be seen, and there are blind spots we all have. My problem is the fact that there has been, until recently, the exclusive domain, the monopoly of white Western photographers to tell our stories. For me, the fact that there was a very narrow narrative of my country was worrying. Unless those other stories are there, that one perception of Bangladesh will exist, which is why I chose this medium. Not only did I choose this medium for myself, I recognize that if I'm going to fight a battle, I need soldiers, which is why I set up a school and all the other things that came along with it. So today we have a fine range of homegrown photographers who have a very different story to tell. And for once, that Western stereotype is being challenged. I've been working on issues of human rights, social justice for a long time, and I take sides. I am on the side of the oppressed, and I think the first time the government and the state started taking notice was in 2009 when I did a show on Tibet. It was the Chinese government which got upset, and they leaned on our government, who leaned on me, and eventually we had riot police surrounding our gallery. The next year, I did a show on extrajudicial killings called Crossfire. The whole nation was livid about the fact that there was impunity for state agents to kill. The images were beautiful, in some ways poetic images on gallery walls with very little text. But anyone who knew the context could work out the sinister element within it. The show was closed down, but we took the government to court, and we were able to get our show reopened. That sent a message. My relationship with the state has been like that at many levels. And for me, what was very revealing was the more recent situation where I was taking pictures of the student movement, saying things that pretty much everyone said, but saying it publicly, saying it forcefully, and had the crosshairs located on me.
Well, let's look at why road safety is such a sensitive issue in Bangladesh. More than 25,000 people have been killed on its roads. Well, joining us now via Skype from Dhaka is Shahidul Alam. He is a photographer and social activist.
Bangladesh has road accidents like anywhere else. The concern was that so many of these accidents are avoidable. And the students came out in protest. What angered me was that rather than embrace these kids for what they'd done, the state turned its forces on them. This was history being made. I needed to document it, and that's what I was doing.
It's been very tense, and despite the promises that the State Minister, Home Minister has made, there seems to be very little interest in backing off.
Uncle, please, আমরা রাস্তা ক্লিয়ার করতেছি।
I personally was just attacked by Chhatra League goons wielding metal rods and sticks.
What we need to look at is what's happening in the street today. The police specifically asked for help from these armed goons to combat unarmed students demanding safe roads. I mean, how ridiculous is that today?
Al Jazeera got in touch with me. They wanted to do an interview. After this interview, I was filing pictures. The house was empty. The doorbell rang. And I went to the door.
30 plainclothes men arrived at the building where he lives. They introduced themselves as Detective Branch. They held the security guard back. They taped up the CCTV cameras. They took the hard disks out of the CCTV cameras. They then went upstairs and abducted my uncle. He was blindfolded, handcuffed, arms behind his back. He was then taken to Detective Branch, and in custody, whilst blindfolded, heavy objects were put on his head. He was punched in the face. He was threatened with waterboarding. They said that they would frame him for trafficking. They said that they would abduct my aunt, his wife. They accused him of being a Mossad agent.
My concern at that time was to make sure I stayed alive. Dead martyrs don't do good reporting.
There's a general election coming up later this year, and the government has grown increasingly intolerant of critical voices.
When Shahidul Alam raised those concerns, they clearly felt that this was undermining their image internationally.
For him to be treated in this manner, where he's not getting access to his fundamental rights, is absolutely shocking.
Another day, another protest in the Bangladeshi capital Dhaka, calling for the release of Shahidul Alam, one of the country's most famous photographers and social activists.
10 Nobel laureates have appealed for the immediate release of the award-winning Bangladeshi photographer Shahidul Alam.
We can only be hopeful the government will feel this international pressure, but we are extremely worried.
Our top story comes from Bangladesh, where award-winning Bangladeshi photographer and activist Shahidul Alam has been released from prison after more than 100 days behind bars. The case against Alam was one of freedom of speech and was closely watched both in Bangladesh and across the world. Shahidul Alam was freed from Dhaka.
Thanks to the phenomenal movement within Bangladesh, across the globe, and the huge risks that people took to campaign for my freedom, I'm here speaking to you today. While I was in jail, I had all my basic needs met. I had food, I had shelter, I had clothing. What I didn't have was freedom. The biggest punishment is to take away a person's freedom. If I do not have freedom of speech, if I do not have freedom of expression, if I cannot exercise my constitutional rights, I'm being deprived exactly the same way. Democracy is an elusive entity. It can be messy. The fact that people have not given up hope, that they continue to fight, keeping that ember alive is very, very important. That is my job and that of all of us around us. The struggle for democracy is a struggle for freedom.